History remembers her as the Black Queen, the woman who ruled France through blood, fear, and poison. But few know what truly transformed Catherine de' Medici from a frightened Italian bride into one of Europe's most feared monarchs. It began on her wedding night, the night love died and vengeance was born. The bells of Notre Dame rang across Paris, heavy with omen rather than joy. The city, drenched in the fragrance of roses and incense, celebrated the union between Catherine de' Medici, the orphan daughter of Lorenzo II de' Medici, and Henry, Duke of Orleans, second son of King Francis I of France. For France, it was a political marriage, a bond between the fading Florentine bankers and the rising French crown. For Catherine, it was supposed to be a salvation, the chance to turn her curse of loneliness into a future of belonging. She had been raised in the convents of Florence, a child of whispers. They said her blood was cursed. They said her ancestors had poisoned popes and kings alike. She was the last of the Medicis, a family as brilliant as it was damned. Now at 14 she was being shipped to a foreign land as the bride of a boy she had never met. Her heart trembled with hope that this might be her escape. The royal wedding was a spectacle of gold and velvet. Courtiers in jeweled attire danced beneath banners of crimson lilies. Trumpets roared, candles flickered, and beneath the great vault of the cathedral, Catherine knelt beside Henry. He was tall, pale and handsome, though his gaze seemed to drift past her, as if she were a shadow on the wall. His hand, gloved and trembling, rested briefly on hers, and she thought she saw in his eyes the gentleness of a prince too shy to speak. But when night fell, and the ceremony faded into memory, Catherine discovered the truth. The bridal chamber was draped in white silk. Perfumed candles glowed around the bed. She sat waiting, her heart pounding. The door opened, but Henry did not come alone. Behind him stepped a tall, older woman, wrapped in pearls and arrogance. Her eyes, dark and commanding, flicked over Catherine like a judge sizing up a prisoner. It was Diane de Poitiers. Henry bowed to her, not as a son to a mother or a prince to a subject, but as a servant to his master. Catherine's stomach turned cold as she realized what she was seeing. The rumors whispered in the corridors were true. Her husband was in love with another woman. Not just any woman, but his father's former mistress, the most powerful courtesan in France. Diane smiled faintly, her lips curving like a blade. "Your Grace," she said softly to Catherine, "a queen's duty begins with obedience. Remember that." Then she turned and kissed Henry. Not a tender kiss, but one of possession. Catherine stood frozen, her wedding gown trembling around her as the two lovers walked past her and whispered in a corner. When Henry finally came to her, his touch was cold, mechanical, without affection. He whispered another woman's name against her skin. That night, Catherine de' Medici died, and something darker took her place. The following days were a blur of humiliation. Diane de Poitiers installed herself as Henry's closest advisor, wearing the jewels King Francis had given Catherine as wedding gifts. Courtiers laughed behind Catherine's back, calling her the little Italian ghost. The king himself was fond of her, but he too adored Diane's grace and wit. Catherine was alone in a court that despised her blood, her accent, her foreign ways. She spent nights staring at her reflection, wondering if she was cursed. The moonlight in her chamber fell upon her wedding ring, a circle of gold that bound her to a man who did not see her. Yet something in her refused to break. She had survived Florence, the riots, the exile of her family, the scorn of priests who called her spawn of the devil. She would survive this too. One evening, while the king held court in the grand hall, Catherine wandered into the royal library. There, among dusty tomes, she found a book written by her ancestors on the ancient art of poisons. The Medici had long been masters of the unseen, of whispers and vials and powders that could bring down empires. She ran her fingers over the pages, feeling the pulse of her lineage stir within her. That night, she dreamt of a serpent coiled around a crown, and when she woke, she knew her destiny had changed. Years passed. Henry remained bound to Diane, but Catherine learned patience. She studied alchemy and astrology under Cosimo Ruggeri, a Florentine scholar who became her confidant. She learned how to charm her enemies with a smile and how to hide her rage behind gentleness. In public, she played the perfect wife, demure, loyal, silent. In private, she watched, remembered, and planned. Her chance came when King Francis died and Henry became King Henry II of France. Catherine, now queen, should have had power, but Diane still ruled the court. She signed documents in the king's name, wore the crown jewels, and even dictated who could approach the throne. Catherine's humiliation deepened, but her patience sharpened into something lethal. During the coronation feast, Catherine watched as Diane paraded before the nobles in a gown of white and gold, the same colors Catherine had worn on her wedding night. It was an insult, deliberate and cruel. Catherine raised her goblet, her smile serene, and whispered to herself, "Enjoy your reign while it lasts." The years that followed were drenched in blood. The court became a labyrinth of betrayals, secret alliances, and hidden deaths. When Henry rode in a joust in honor of Diane, Catherine begged him not to. She had dreamt of his death. But Henry, eager to please his mistress, ignored her warning. The lance pierced his eye, and he died screaming days later. As the court mourned, Catherine stood by his bed, silent. Diane was forbidden to enter. Catherine had her revenge, as not through poison but through destiny. Yet vengeance did not end with Henry's death. It began anew. When her sons took the throne one after another, Catherine became the true ruler of France. She controlled the regency, the council, and the crown. Her enemies whispered that she consulted demons, that she drank from chalices of poison. But what they feared most was her mind, sharp, cold, and patient as winter. And when the kingdom began to fracture under religious wars, Catherine's cruelty reached its height. She remembered every humiliation, every insult from her wedding night, and unleashed her wrath upon those who dared defy her. But before the massacres, before the rivers of blood that history would name after her, there was that one night, a girl in white silk, betrayed and forgotten. And from that betrayal was born a queen who would kill to be remembered. The dawn that followed King Henry's death was unlike any other. France awoke under a sky the color of ash, and the bells that tolled across Paris sounded more like funeral dirges than royal tributes. Catherine de' Medici stood beside the coffin of her husband, her black veil fluttering in the damp air, and felt no tears on her cheeks. Behind her, nobles whispered, not of grief, but of fear. For the first time, Diane de Poitiers had been banished from court. Her jewels were seized, her estates confiscated, her name erased from royal documents. The woman who once ruled France through beauty now lived in silence, exiled to a distant chateau. Catherine had not spoken a word of vengeance. She did not need to. Power had simply shifted, as if destiny itself had bowed to her will. The king was dead, but Catherine was alive, and she intended to remain that way, whatever it cost. Her son, Francis II, a sickly boy of 15, inherited the throne. His bride, Mary, Queen of Scots, was young, beautiful, and adored by all. Catherine recognized the same pattern that had haunted her own youth, another foreign woman stealing her place. But this time she would not be the powerless one. The court glittered again, but beneath its beauty was rot. The nobility, divided between Catholics and Huguenots, sharpened their knives for civil war. The Guise family, Mary's uncles, controlled the king and through him the kingdom. Catherine was reduced to little more than an ornament, a shadow in her own palace. But she had learned long ago how to use shadows to her advantage. She began to weave her web in silence. At night, she met secretly with Nostradamus, the mysterious astrologer whose predictions both fascinated and terrified Europe. Together they studied charts and stars, searching for signs of survival amid chaos. Nostradamus warned her that France would bleed under her sons, that her dynasty would drown in its own ambition. Catherine listened, not to repent, but to prepare. She summoned her old confidant, the Florentine Ruggieri, who brought with him the dark knowledge of her ancestors, the Medici poisons. Small vials of clear liquid, powders that could mimic illness, and tinctures that killed without a trace, she built her cabinet noir, a secret network of spies and alchemists who intercepted letters, recorded plots, and silenced enemies. She told no one of these things. Not her sons, not her lovers, not her confessors. To the world, Catherine de' Medici appeared as the grieving widow and pious mother. To those who crossed her, she became something else, a queen of shadows. When Francis II died suddenly in 1560, his ear swollen, his screams echoing through the palace, many whispered that Catherine's hand had guided his fate. None dared say it aloud. She wept publicly, but her tears dried quickly. Her next son, Charles IX, only 10 years old, ascended the throne, and Catherine became regent, the true power behind the crown. At last, she ruled France, but the kingdom she inherited was fractured beyond repair. The Protestants demanded freedom of faith. The Catholics demanded their extermination, and both demanded the Queen Mother's loyalty. Catherine chose survival. She played both sides, signing treaties with one hand and orders of execution with the other. The people began to call her La Reine Noire, the Black Queen. Her palace became a maze of secrets. Servants disappeared. Advisors fell ill after banquets. Ambassadors who defied her returned home in coffins. And yet, amid the fear she inspired, there was a strange order. France still stood because she refused to let it crumble. Her greatest test came with her daughter Marguerite's marriage to Henry of Navarre, a Protestant prince. Catherine believed that uniting the two faiths in marriage might end the wars. Paris was adorned with banners, bells, and feasts, but hatred simmered beneath the surface. The wedding night should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the prelude to slaughter. On the night of August 23, 1572, the bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois rang once more, not for a wedding, but for death. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre began. Catherine stood on her balcony as chaos erupted below. Paris burned. The Seine ran red with blood. Men in armor dragged Huguenots from their beds, women screamed, and children were cut down in the streets. Her son, King Charles IX, trembled beside her, crying out in horror, "Mother, will God forgive us?" Catherine's face was unreadable. She had not ordered every death, but she had not stopped them either. To her, it was the price of survival. A queen could not afford the luxury of innocence. By dawn, thousands were dead. France was quiet again, but it was a silence haunted by ghosts. Catherine walked through the palace corridors, the echoes of the slaughter following her like footsteps in the dark. She felt no triumph, only the weight of inevitability. Years passed, and her sons died one after another. Charles IX, then Henry III. Each death carved another wound into her soul, yet each also deepened her hunger to control what remained. She ruled through fear, through illusion, through the poison of memory. In her final years, Catherine wandered the same halls where she had once walked as a frightened bride. The tapestries of her youth were faded, the laughter of courtiers replaced by whispers of rebellion. Her reflection in the mirror was not that of the innocent girl who had crossed the Alps from Florence, but of a woman shaped by betrayal and blood. She often returned to the chapel where she had married Henry so many decades before. She would kneel in the silence, her fingers brushing the same stone floor that had once glowed beneath the candles of celebration. And sometimes, in that silence, she thought she could hear the echoes of her wedding night. Diane's laughter, Henry's distant voice, the shattering of her heart. History would name her a murderer, a witch, a tyrant, but in her own mind she had been something far simpler, a survivor in a world that devoured the weak. As she lay dying in 1589, France still at war with itself, Catherine whispered to her confessor, "I was born surrounded by enemies. I die the same, but I kept the crown upon my sons' heads. Tell me, is that not love?" The priest said nothing. He only prayed. Outside, the bells tolled once again, the same mournful sound that had marked her wedding, her coronations, her massacres. Paris went on living as it always had, beneath the weight of its sins. And somewhere in the shadow of Notre Dame, the spirit of a young Italian bride still walked, her heart forever frozen on the night her dreams died, and her destiny began. Because for Catherine de' Medici, that night did not simply make her a queen. It made her a legend, the queen who turned betrayal into power and love into death.